Systems engaged. Frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thank you for joining us. Today's show is my talk with J. Marshall Smith about not only being a working cartoonist and teacher, but also his recent graphic novel, Testament, which throws together space exploration with spirituality and what man creates in his own image and what we leave behind and other stuff. That is coming up shortly. The next episode in the schedule continues the weekly sprint through the month of May on the 21st for an interview with Sidney Halpern and Trygve Fast for their first graphic novel, Infected for Science, looking at a group of conscientious objectors during World War II who signed up for a dangerous mission, letting the government infect them with hepatitis to help scientists learn more about the disease sickening soldiers on the front lines. The following weekend, we'll be releasing a remastered version of my April 2020 interview with writer Josh Dysart, where we talked about his work on Unknown Soldier and Goodbye Paradise, as well as ranked favorite Jackie Chan movies. We're doing this because on May 28th, Josh is returning to the show to talk about his new horror miniseries from Bad Idea called The Hab, with art by David Lapham and Bill Sienkiewicz. So, with all that in place, let's get into my chat with Baltimore cartoonist and teacher J. Marshall Smith. Today's guest is a cartoonist, illustrator, and educator based in Baltimore, which makes us de facto neighbors, who came up through the disciplines of painting and printmaking before finding his way to comics. And that background shows, because his work does not look like it comes from somebody who learned to draw from comics, but rather from somebody who developed a way of looking at things and then figuring out what comics could do with that. He's built his readership carefully and honestly, self-publishing collections of comics and art through Kickstarter, mailing drawings to his Patreon supporters, teaching, tabling at festivals, doing the quiet, unglamorous work of caretaking that relationship between creator and audience. Just this past weekend, he tabled at the MoCCA Festival in New York, launching a new collaborative comic called The Vanishing Man with illustrator Catherine Lambs, about running into your bad ex in a nursing home, about frailty and memory and what we do and don't owe each other. We will cover all of that, I'm sure, but it's the topic of his debut graphic novel, Testament, published by Bulgilhan Press and available now, that I am most excited to talk about. The book follows the android caretaker, designation, Testament, designed to tend to the members of the Order of the Abundant Grace of the Cosmic Christ during their monastic and scholarly existence studying a distant planet. As the all-female order dwindles and only one sister remains, Testament is left to reckon with faith, grief, memory, and the prospect of immortality in a solitary but spiritual infinity. It is a book that has science and faith not as adversaries, but as allies. It has made me think of things that I'm, frankly, a little nervous to try and articulate on air. But thankfully, I have cartoonist and author J. Marshall Smith here to help me through that. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm good. Wow, that was quite an intro. I've never heard all of that said by somebody else before.
Did I do a decent job covering things?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it makes me sound more authoritative than maybe I feel. But yeah, I think you got all the main points down.
I mean, you are an author, so like
I need to get used to that.
Yeah, you do. So we are recording this, 48 hours after MoCCA-ish? You're just back from New York. How was that experience?
It was great. Yeah, it was really fun. This was my second year doing MoCCA, and I had a blast. It's a good festival always, and a great year for just stacked with talent and people whose work I like, people who I personally like that I got to see. And I'd say half the value of those shows is the social aspect, like seeing your friends who you only ever see on the road. It's nice to do a show when you have a new project out, right? So you get to celebrate this thing you've been working on and hopefully get it into the hands of people. And especially nice to meet people who have already read it who want to come up and talk to you about it.
So speaking of debuting, we're talking about The Vanishing Man and Testament.
Yeah.
When did Testament actually come out?
December.
Okay.
I don't have a specific date down because, but December.
Around then.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know when I bought it was February, I think, and I knew it was newish.
Yeah, with a Kickstarter and everything, it kind of blurs the lines of like, when is this officially out?
Unfortunately, I did not get it through Kickstarter, but fortunately, I got it through Atomic Books, which is
Great.
almost literally a stone's throw from where I'm sitting right here. I was looking and I saw it and I was like, oh, I recognize that name. I have Solace County Volume 1 and Good Girl Leica, which I just realized I didn't mention in the intro.
That's fine.
I was like, oh, it's a new book. Let me get this. And I read
Yeah.
it and whew, man, I was unprepared. But again, we will get to that. So, The Vanishing Man, you
Mhm.
are a cartoonist who is now writing for somebody else.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that this was the thing you were going to branch out with for that? How has that experience been?
So The Vanishing Man is actually an adaptation of a story that I did and wrote and illustrated when I was taking a comics class in grad school. And I was talking to Catherine about, they had mentioned that they want to do comics or at least try them out. They're a fantastic illustrator,
Hmm.
doing a lot of
Hmm.
movie posters and editorial. And I guess a couple years ago now, I basically wrote an effusive email saying how much I love their work and would they please do the variant cover art for Sauce County 3,
Hmm.
because I wanted to try out doing a variant cover for like fundraising for that.
Hmm.
And I was happy to hear that they were down for it, and we've kept up a correspondence. And they had recently mentioned wanting to try out comics, but didn't really feel confident in writing something. And I was like, I can write you a story.
Hmm.
And we had originally kicked around a different one that I have had the script for a while that I couldn't quite finish, and it was looking like it was going to be too long for somebody's debut attempt at
Hmm.
comics.
Hmm.
So I realized that the original version of Vanishing Man was only like, I don't know, 8 pages, maybe 10, I don't remember. But I was like, I can knock out a, 16-page short and we can do a zine. And I
Hmm.
basically just rewrote it that way. And in terms of process, it was pretty easy for me because when I'm doing my own comics, at least for longer stories, not strips, but like a full
Hmm.
story, I
Hmm.
write out a whole script myself, even though I'm the one who's going to be drawing it. Mostly because I find pacing is really important for a story, and you might want to rearrange things, and all of that is easier to edit in a written script than it
Hmm.
is after you've
Hmm.
drawn everything out.
Hmm. Yeah, I was curious about that because you mentioned in some interview, working on Testament, how grueling it could be at times for you emotionally. And you had mentioned when you were at the scripting stage, and like I wondered if you had needed to script it because it was something that you were going with a publisher for, right? Like if Zach
Yeah,
wanted to see it in a script thing, but it sounds like that's something that you're comfortable with as a process.
Zach from Bulgilhan, he wanted a hand on the ball. He wanted to be able to know where the story is going. But he's also
Hmm.
pretty open-ended in terms of process. I don't remember who suggested the script stage. It was probably me, just because that's what I like doing.
Hmm.
And I want
Hmm.
their input.
Hmm.
So we actually had originally planned on Testament being much shorter, like 76 pages. And
Hmm.
I finished it at 76 pages, sent it in with the request, could we talk about maybe making it longer? Because I got all the important plot points in there, but there were things that I had trimmed or moments that I felt could be redone to be better paced and inject some more quietude in there, which I think is really important to
Hmm.
the story. I always prepare myself to have to like argue for my rights as an artist, and Zach
Hmm.
immediately agreed. So I had prepared for nothing.
Yeah, the breath and the, like you said, quietude, solitude, solace, particularly towards the end of the book, really helps the parts that you would have saved mean more and land more. So I'm really glad you were able to do that because it helped the work. Getting back to Vanishing Man, so is this a one shot? Is this a Okay. Have you really worked on anything since you've collaborated with Catherine? Like, has that process had a chance to maybe filter into how you work
Mm.
by yourself?
I haven't done anything new, like a few shorts, like diary
Hmm.
comics and stuff, but no stories. Part of that is I teach and I'm doing
Ah.
3 new courses right now,
Mhm.
so that's been pretty busy. I have some stories I would like to be developing and getting ready to like pitch to publishers, but right now they're just in the sort of nebulous early stages, and I haven't had time to really get the work in.
Mhm.
And I don't want to rush them, but also comics take so long that I don't want to keep putting them off forever.
Mhm.
But I felt that the process with Vanishing Man was pretty natural because I already write my own scripts
Right.
already. And I'd been wanting to do something. You had mentioned Solace County earlier, and Solace County is my sort of anthology series. I think of it as like a container for my independent work,
Mhm.
where each one has like 4 or 5 different projects. Originally, I'd hoped for them to be annual, but in the way of annuals, it soon turned into maybe
Yeah, yeah.
biannual and optimistically. In Solace County 3, I illustrated a story that was written by someone else.
Hmm.
And that was a really fun experiment. And I like, provided it's a good partnership, I like
Mhm.
working with other people. And I would like in future volumes to have one project every volume that I worked
Mhm.
with someone else on. So Vanishing Man's going to be that for volume 4.
Okay.
But right now it's
Cool.
just in print as a standalone zine.
Where do you teach?
So right now I'm doing the adjunct shuffle. So every semester it's different, but
Mhm.
right now I'm teaching 2 classes at Towson University, just north of Baltimore. And I'm
Mhm.
also teaching a sequential arts class up at PCAD, Pennsylvania College of Art and Design
Hmm.
in Lancaster, which is a bit of a schlep, but once a week. And
Mhm.
I really like the school. I like the students. I like everybody I'm working with. I don't
Mhm.
know if I could do it more than once a week though, because it's like an hour and a half up there and
Oh,
then back.
yeah, yeah. Driving, which,
Yeah.
oh, actually, the last couple of people I've talked to on the show have been cartoonists who've also been teachers, and they've said that they learn more from the students than the
Mm.
students are probably learning from them. Do you feel that you're in a similar position? Like, do you learn a lot from the students? Although, I guess I should preface it by saying it's more like specifically comics focused in their respects, and it might not be as much for you. But certainly,
Yeah.
do you
I learn
enjoy
from
that back and
students all the
forth?
time.
Mhm.
Sometimes what they're teaching me is patience. But I learned
Yeah,
stuff. I refuse to learn Gen Z slang or cultural references, mostly because I'm comfortable not knowing what they're talking about.
yeah.
But
Ignorance is bliss. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I don't have to be cool. I don't need to be. I'm fine with that. I learn stuff from them all the time, and I think just the act of teaching in general refines your thinking about whatever you're teaching, right? Because you have to find ways of communicating it, which
Hmm.
then makes you better at communicating it with yourself. And that's been tremendously helpful. Sometimes I'm wishing I was teaching less because I'd want more time to work on comics, but then I do think that my even the drawing itself gets better because the thinking gets better
Mm-hmm.
because of teaching.
You have a quote on the inside of Testament towards the end of your little author bio here. He likes his work best when it is unprecious, articulate, and resonant. Can you
Hmm.
unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll just go down the line there.
Yeah,
Those are
any
kind of
order.
pillars. I find it's helpful for an artist, particularly someone in like commercial arts like illustration or comics, who is trying to figure out where their work fits in like a niche or like how to market it or appeal to people. I don't know if this is good advice because it's not like I've got a ton of clients banging down my door to get me to do freelance for them, but I think it's helpful to say, when do you like your work best?
Mm,
And I think that can help a lot. And for me, it unprecious is the word I like to use a lot because I can draw digitally, but I don't because I find it's too easy to zoom in on things and erase things and get really fiddly with stuff.
hmm
I like smudgy, messy, scratchy texture. Lots of times people ask me about what brushes I'm using because they think I'm drawing stuff digitally because that's all that they do. And
Hmm.
they're sometimes disappointed when I tell them that I'm just using intentionally smudgy pens and then scanning them on the black and white threshold, and that makes it into like a chunky line because the computer has to decide where in this gray smear it's not black anymore and it's white.
Hmm.
And you can change that threshold, right? And I sometimes do, but I like the back and forth with the drawing and the artist where you are making the drawing with itself in a way, like by
Hmm.
responding to it. And I like the lack of control where you sort of hand off that interpretation to the computer in the scanning, and then you
Hmm.
push back again when you're doing color digitally or editing. And I feel that's even
Yeah.
part of the process where I don't do very tight pencils.
Hmm.
I'll sketch these things just enough to like figure out composition, and then
Hmm.
I'm doing a lot of the problem solving in the ink stage.
Okay.
And some of my favorite drawings in Testament have caked on layers of like whiteout and then ink on top of that, and then I mess that up again and I put more whiteout or paint or patched on paper and then more ink on top of that.
Hmm.
And even at after the cleaned up stage, I try to keep some degree of that
Hmm.
texture. I like art where you can see the seams, right?
Hmm.
Where you can see how it was made. So that's unpreciousness, right? In some of my poetry comics or diary comics, I'll even scratch out words instead of actually erasing it and leave that in. It gives it more of a diaristic, intimate quality, which I think is important for that kind of work.
Hmm.
That's unpreciousness.
Hmm.
Articulate is it's important to me that my work speaks to people, right? I'm not interested in being mysterious. And it's important. I want my work to address the reader like an equal, not like it's coming down the mountain and giving that something to them or unnecessarily mystic and hard to parse. I like to think of that as visually articulate, right? That's not exactly the same as illustrative. Like I do illustration work, and people sometimes talk about comics as if they are part of illustration, but I feel like they're their own thing. They're certainly
Hmm.
illustrative,
Hmm.
but it's such a different discipline. But in any case, I want my drawing to be not necessarily realistic,
Hmm.
but have a sense of lived fidelity and like a grounding in experience and the textures of life,
Hmm.
and to reach out to that experience in other people's lives, which is where the resonance comes in. Where I think it's important for my work to say something that matters to me and to someone else, right? And it's not just entertaining, but has something that echoes in different experiences, but it's not just didactic.
Hmm. Man, I'm trying not to like jump right into Testament, but it's
I mean, we
what's
can. That's what we're here
yeah,
to
yeah.
talk about.
Okay, so I'm gonna say from this point on, potential spoilers for Testament. You're talking about Unprecious. Looking at the book artistically, it does have that balance between there is storytelling, but also illustrative. You balance that really well. It has I keep wanting to say like a wiggle, but
Mm,
one of the things that I like, or one of the things I'm finding that I tend to be gravitating towards is like independent science fiction. Let's say drawn by indie creators, or the opposite of like the John Byrne, Terry Austin, James Cameron type of slick type of
mm,
thing. It has more of a tooth to it. And I think Testament very much falls in that. You do your world building, you do your grounding, but the environment is very lived in. It is very recognizable, but also alien,
mm,
literally, in some cases. But you do have that balance of being able to have the illustration, but also the storytelling and letting that grounding help sell the emotional beats and see the scaffolding by which the emotions of the book is able to hang very, very
Mm.
well. One of the reasons I like this as a comic particularly is people who've listened to my show more than 5 minutes will probably be taking a drink. I'm sure this idea comes from somewhere else, but I first ran across it in Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. You have the level of realism of human faces or whatever. If you have a less real face,
Hmm.
the reader invests more of themselves in the character. It's like it's an emptier vessel and the reader just pours himself into it. Having this as a comic automatically makes the person experience it give more of themselves to it because
Hmm.
we are seeing abstractions of Judith and the other sisters. And then for Testament in particular, having that much more of a blank-ish face, one of the ways it grounds him as the main because he is in some ways it feels like he's the one that we're pouring the most of ourselves into because
Hmm.
his face is so not it's very expressive but it's very simple except for a particular point where that is not the case and that
Hmm.
is jarring both to Judith but to the reader as well. Was that a conscious part of designing the visual of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, you had mentioned that theory of that kind of empathetic response with a cartoon that McCloud
Hmm.
talks about. I had read Understanding Comics years ago, and I had not read it fairly
Oh,
recently when I was doing
yeah.
Testament, but I was working on designs and I knew that I wanted that like this is a comic, right?
Hmm.
It is a comic and I wanted to embrace the medium of comics instead of trying to make it do things that other mediums would need to do. And one of those things was that it's a discipline of cartooning, and I wanted Testament, who is artificial, to be one step more artificial than the
Hmm.
human characters.
Hmm.
And then recently, because I'm teaching this comics class, I reread that chapter with my students, and I was like, this explains my own decision making in the book I just did.
Yeah, yeah,
Really
yeah.
articulately. I mean, everybody says it, but it's a good book,
Yeah,
Understanding
yeah.
Comics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily intending that choice to make Testament more resonant to the reader.
Hmm.
And sometimes you'd ask me on any given day, and I would tell you Judith is the main character or Testament is the main character,
Hmm.
because both of their arcs are really central to the story.
Hmm.
But I knew I wanted T Testament to feel more like a drawing and more like a cartoon than the other characters. And
Hmm.
part of that was that everything about Testament within the world, like within fiction, is made for the comfort of the humans. We give a few instances in the book where we see beneath the layer of called a malleable external layer, but it's essentially the soft stuff on the outside of the weird robot parts on the
Hmm.
inside. And that I liked the idea that Testament is literally a shape changer,
Hmm.
right? We don't see that very much in the story because there's no need for it. And that the guiding principle for what Testament looks like is what the humans want Testament to look like. So
Hmm.
there's a point in the story where Judith is taking a nap and Testament is left alone, and we get the one of the rare views of what Testament does when no humans are around,
Hmm.
which is basically rehearsing humanity. He initially changes between a few different sort of emoji-like expressions of
Hmm.
sorrow, and then shifts his face into a very human face, and even into the face of Sister Philomena, who is a character
Hmm.
that dies earlier in the story. And I think part of it is that up until now, Testament is taking care of people who have other people. But now Testament is taking care of someone who has no one else. So
Hmm.
there is a degree of humanity that Testament is required to perform now that maybe they haven't done up until now. But also, there's an element of it that this is their own expression of grief in like putting on the faces of the dead.
Hmm.
and trying to figure out their own being by imitating humans. But it's a reminder to the reader that Testament is inhuman.
Hmm.
So and that Testament is kind of scary, right?
Hmm.
And that there's a machine that is meant to love you and care for you is still a machine made by some corporation who is also watching you all the time.
Hmm.
And initially I had cut that scene from the script, and a friend was editing the script and the version without that scene in it. And he was saying that this is all really nice, but the robot is too nice all the time and not scary enough. And there's no degree of discomfort. And I kind of agreed with that in that, like, I had originally written it just to be like, hey, look at this cool idea I came up with. The robot has goo on the outside. But
Yeah. Yeah.
in reality, it plays a pretty important role, I think, in
Hmm.
telling us about what Testament is like and why. But without really telling us. I wanted him to feel alien.
Hmm. Yeah, because part of the arc of the story and the ending that we know will happen is that Testament will be alone. So you get to see what alone for Testament means
Mhm.
before he's confronted with that. So that's another reason why having it back in is very powerful. Getting back to the idea of this being a comic and being able to really do things with it that you can't do in other medium. This is a two-color book.
Mm.
Why did you pick this color?
I I like working in a kind of two color palette a lot. I
Mhm.
find it's helpful in breaking down value, where I'll just have this is the dark layer, which I will use for like the key drawings. In this,
Mhm.
it's a dark blue and a middle value. And then I'll have one halftone variation that I'll use, which that surprisingly gives you a very full range of values. And I knew I wanted one of them to be cool and one of them to be warm,
Mhm.
which would allow for different kind of temperature relationships in the story with even just two colors. I like the blue because it's close to black, but not exactly. It plays a similar role to how black is used in key layers and other things, but it shifts it just a little bit,
Mm.
which I find people are so used to just looking at black outlines for everything that if you just change the color a little bit, there it feels fresh, and then people are more open to new experiences. But also with just two colors, you really got to lock them in so that they are just right for each other.
Mhm.
The mid-tone I think of as coral. It's a kind of dusty salmon, just between orange and yellow and a little bit or just between orange and pink and like a little desaturated.
Mhm.
And I needed it to work for a desert landscape and the
Mhm.
sun and someone's clothes and skin. So it needed to
Mhm.
do all those things, and it naturally sort of fell to that. And I honestly just put it in as a placeholder after noodling around with it for a while, thinking that, I can always go in and change it later if I need to.
Mhm.
And I took a trip out to Badlands National Park. First off, I was thinking, haha, I'm so clever. I'll write it off as a research trip
Hmm.
and then get a little vacation out of it and write that off. And in reality, it actually was a very effective research trip. I got a ton of very useful photos, and it was in March, which is not sort of off season. So there weren't, thousands of tourists running around, and it felt very alien. It was before the spring blooms. So it was very much desert and grasslands and rock formations, which is why I wanted to go there.
Mhm.
And it has a lot of rock formations that are pretty much that exact color, that
Hmm.
kind of pinkish, orangey earth color. So I was like, this is pretty good. And then after going on that trip, I was like, this is exactly right, which felt good. I do think if we do another edition, I might see if I can maybe turn its opacity down like 10%,
Mhm.
just so that you see a little bit more of the paper coming through it. But this is me like splitting hairs, which I'll do until I die. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. We did a Pantone printing for this, so
Okay.
it's just the two colors with the very specific colors. instead of like a 4-color digital printing. And we picked very specific colors, and the printer sent us the proofs, and the
Mm,
mid-tone in that they sent were way off.
mm.
Way off. Much closer to like highlighter orange, which you can imagine was alarming
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they really got to get these colors just right. We couldn't figure out where things went because they were looking at the exact same code as we were. And we actually ended up meeting a representative from the printer was going to be at SPX. And so was our
Hmm.
book designer. And so was me and Zach from Bulgilhan. So
Hmm.
we were all just huddled behind his table with our different swatch books.
Hmm.
And I still don't know why the color was. I think that maybe their Pantone book was out of date or something or
Mm.
whatever, but it eventually we got on the right page, and I'm very pleased with how the color turned out.
Yeah, it's a very distinctive looking book for a number of reasons, but certainly the color is one of them. And I will not have it open as I'm sort of flipping through it. It's usually a little easier because I usually have a PDF. Actually, no, that's even worse because then I have to like actively pick it up to look at it. But I'm going to again put it down. So let's pull back a little bit here. How did this story come about? What led you to
Mhm.
this planet, to this situation, to this story?
I've come to realize that I am attracted to stories that have an uncomfortable premise, like a kind of what would you do in that situation,
Hmm.
often related to some kind of social or moral discomfort that I don't have an answer to. And I want to try to find an answer through writing, or really what I want to do is pose that question to the reader more than find the
Hmm.
answer myself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I think comics are a great vehicle for that. We're talking about McCloud earlier. He talks about closure and that idea of the gap between panels. The gutter is where the action really happens imaginatively. You're giving the reader two pieces of a puzzle and asking them how they fit.
Hmm.
And I think that that kind of writing that I'm interested in, where you are giving the reader questions about some kind of difficult situation, is well suited to comics because they're kind of subconsciously doing that work through visual closure.
Hmm.
There are a lot of questions at the heart of Testament, one of which is like, how does the transferal of faith work? Does it work even? You look at families that are religious, and half of them will break with their faith tradition, and the others will stay and or even become more devout, and they have the same experiences.
Hmm.
Um, Similarly, I was just really interested in the question of the difference between knowledge of a thing and even fluency and proficiency in a thing
Hmm.
and the relational elements of faith, particularly in Christianity, where if you had a artificial intelligence, not in the slop thing that we talk about now, but like
Right,
a
right, right.
an artificially made being,
Hmm.
and you could instantaneously program them with millennia of theology, ritual, practice, church history, all of these things, is that the same thing as a religious faith, right? The difference between
Hmm.
an education in something and like a relational trust in something.
Hmm.
And I was interested in where that boundary lies and in the, not really knowing where it is, and that that's an inherent part of that question, I think, for everybody. So that was what I was primarily interested in. And through the writing, I found other questions about expressing doubt and despair is an inherent part of a lot of people's spiritual experience that in many I'm primarily talking about Protestant Christianity because that's my background,
Hmm.
but this is probably true in many religions that those things are often off taboo, or people will say like that's natural and good even, but that you can't talk about it, or that the natural momentum of the society you're within
Hmm.
will make it stifling or difficult to deal with that. which is something that Judith is dealing with in this book, where Testament's primary goal, I don't know if Testament believes any of this stuff or believes anything, and I wrote the book.
Mhm.
Somebody was talking to me recently about Testament as this like devoutly Christian robot, and I'm like, I don't think it's not in the book. You can believe whatever you want. I don't think Testament's been baptized. I don't
Mhm.
think, Testament knows everything there is to know about Christianity and cares for people who I imagine are like 80% of this expedition are nuns,
Mhm.
and is very good at taking care of them. And part of that is taking care of them spiritually, but there's also Muslim people on this expedition. He's just as capable with them. We just don't see it because I don't really have the authority to write about that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So those are the sort of questions I was interested in. And what's it like to be dying and having this crisis of faith? And what's it like to be a suicidal nun on another planet and have a robot who doesn't know how to take care of you other than to throw more Bible at you?
Right.
And even is that even right or wrong? Maybe there is no correct, or maybe not correct. Maybe there's no perfect solution to that situation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think how the story might have changed if you had had the predominant lens to be something that was like Judaism or a different
Mm.
religion? Like,
Oh, I'm sure it'd be very different. There are certainly questions that I think are true for that everybody faces, whether they
mhm.
have a religious experience or are completely irreligious. They probably have similar experiences. They just answer those things with different frameworks.
Mhm.
But also, I think it is a foolish and even arrogant thing to suggest that they're all the same, right? That
Mhm.
they're all the same, and I think that's the thing people will only say if they're outside of all of them, right? Because there are many, many similarities, probably more similarities with people's religious experiences than they act like, but there are important differences that define the characters of those belief systems,
Mhm.
both in like theologically, but also like socially. An important part of this book, I feel like, is that Judith's crisis of faith. I don't even think she's dealing with an issue of that she doesn't believe anymore. It just that it doesn't matter to her anymore.
Mhm.
Because a religious experience, as opposed to a spiritual one, is also an experience of community,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Which
And
she no longer has.
which she no longer has. At the beginning of the book, she doesn't really even think of Testament as anything more than like a talking appliance or like a pleasant artificial pet.
Mhm.
That the issue of a sort of reciprocal community relationship is out of question for her at the beginning of this. And I don't think like there's a negative side to that, right? Where like
Mhm.
people's dogmatic religious communities can become enforcers and harm them through these things. But also, I think that there's a natural thing where many of these things cannot be expressed alone,
Mhm.
and that they have to be experienced with others. At least within Christianity, there's the idea that to see God, you have to see God in other people, right? That like people are made in the image of God, and that
Mhm.
people carry that with them, and that you need community as if you are attempting to love God, you have to love other people.
So the name of the order is both spot on and I don't want to say cool, but like evocative. It does a lot of work in a very compressed space. Can you walk us through how you came to that particular phrasing?
I wanted to imagine a sect of Christianity that I liked better than any of the contemporary ones that I see all the
Mhm.
time, which is easy to do because you don't have to deal with real people. You get to make them up and hold them at a distance and kill most of them off in the first 20 pages of the book.
Yeah.
I kicked around a few different ideas, or not even having a name, right? You don't really even need a name for the order.
No.
But I like to think of them as a sort of they're neither Catholic nor Protestant. They're some new thing. I mean, who knows how far in the future this is, or if there's been some kind of reconciliation there, or or even
Mhm.
further schisms or who knows what. But the name, it's funny that you say that it does a lot of world building in a small amount of time,
Mhm.
because I agree. All right, I picked all that stuff for a purpose, and they actually hold very specific meaning, but it's also a really long name, right?
I mean,
So
even
it's both
that
too long
gives it
and
a it gives it a bit of like, oh, of course it's not Catholic, but like it plays into that infrastructure, the structure of these things, right? It's
yeah,
not the order, it's the holy of the this
yeah.
of the thing of the thing of the thing.
Which
Maybe a
it
little
connects
shorter, a
it
little
to a
longer.
world that is bigger than you see,
Hmm.
right? It suggests that the world is bigger than what we're seeing in this story, which was important to me.
Hmm.
And I imagine that most of the world that this takes place in is abundantly secular in a sort of Star Trek way.
Hmm.
That like it's not like this whole world is full of these people, but that a monastic order of anarchist communist nuns on the moon are the perfect candidates for a one-way trip,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Is that like they're already living a world apart from most people. They
Yeah.
can do that on a planet that's so far away you can't come back from it.
Right.
And because part of their sort of religious society is a scientific interest or like
Hmm.
poetic and artistic interest, like the study of the world as worship makes them deaf explorers, right? So the actual name, went back and forth on either calling this a society or the order. I ended up going with order because it was a little bit easier for people to understand
Hmm.
without any, prior interest in studying religious sects and cults and things.
Hmm.
But I was tempted by calling it society because I think of them as fairly anarchic and not having a ton of order, right? A ton of hierarchy or anything. It's similar in a way that a lot of Quaker organizations are fairly non-hierarchical, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. But I ended up calling it order because that evoked nuns and things.
Hmm.
The abundant grace, so unending grace, unlimited, and available to all and given freely to all. And abundant grace is a theological concept
Hmm.
in sort of Christology, but it is a fairly radical idea when you look at how people actually act and talk about grace in their actual life. But of the cosmic Christ, and a cosmic Christ is a sort of idea. I don't remember who originally coined the term, but it decenters humanity from the redemptive work of Jesus
Hmm.
and centers just all being. So it focuses on the natural world and non-believing humans, and it's a much less insular
Hmm.
view
Hmm.
of sort of Christology and Christianity. So just their name tells you a lot about their belief system and how they approach the world, right? Is that it is very open and for all things and all people, and it's for robots in a way. Because
Hmm.
like if you ask a random member of the Order of the Abundant Grace of the Cosmic Christ if Testament was a Christian or was going to whatever. I don't think they would treat it like an interesting thing and talk about it, but I don't think they
Hmm.
care. It doesn't matter to them anymore because they're going to treat everything the same anyway. But it's also a question in terms of the sort of religion questions for Testament are unique because a lot of people are approaching religion through fear of divine punishment or a desire for divine reward. And
Hmm.
what does it matter if you're going to live forever? Right? Or if it's even a question of if you even have a soul, which like humans can't prove their souls either. So if for a lot of people their only interest theologically it becomes less about their neighbor or the world and more about winning some kind of religious game or
Hmm.
war, which
Yeah, yeah.
is a problem, right? But I kind of just rambled there, but I think I
No,
answered
no,
your
no,
question.
no. That's all good. So I, I don't necessarily want to do this, but I feel like this is the point where I start unpacking what I took away from this, like
Yeah.
how just having read it and then letting it sort of simmer and percolate on a basic level. And this struck me as being very sort of Jesuit coded. This
Mm,
idea of faith and science can work together. They are not mutually exclusive. Your worship of God, the decoupling of Jesus from the earth, and from having it be all of creation, which is now the universe and everything, means the worship of God is in trying to learn more about this abundance and this bounty that you've been given. Not just the land you're on, not just the society, but the planet, the galaxy, the universe. And so this is an extension of that. And then couple that with science, where it seems like to people that don't really think about it, that science is about having the answers. Science is about asking questions and getting information and then asking more questions. That part of it, that search is in the worshiping to somebody like that is, I feel like the order going to this planet, their worship is there is a part of God's creation out that nobody will ever get to except for them. And they're going and they are cataloging what's there. And their sacrifice is that they have given up their place in society, which may have been sort of tenuous to begin with, but still it is a sacrifice. Like they know they have left behind this world and they've gone to this place, and that is part of their worship. So it is, and I think, I should have written a lot more of this down. You are making the reader think about two sides of this equation by really showing one side and maybe vaguely implying the other. But what it had me thinking of was like, if their worship is trying to find answers to these questions, knowing that those answers will make more questions, the thrust of their interaction with faith is with not knowing. The other side of it, the part that's dangerous, are the people that aren't asking questions. They're the people that know, that think that they know or whatever, act like they know what God's plan is. It's like, I know this. I am certain it is this. I cannot be swayed. You are wrong. That is the tension. In the book, at least for me, by giving so much of one side to it, that it automatically makes your brain figure like, okay, well, what is the other side of that? And the book gets you to think about that type of dichotomy without having to have a villain. And then there's Testament. If he has all of this knowledge and he's taking care of these humans, but there are things that he doesn't understand. Will he, man, I really should have written this down. Will he be able to question the way the sisters question? Right. Because if he's like, I know what worship is, the definition of it. I see them worshiping and going through their lives and sacrificing, and ultimately their lives end. Now I'm theoretically going to live forever unless, a huge rock falls on me or, some sort of natural whatever. Am I going to be able to question the way that they do? Am I going to be able to live? It's not necessarily like, am I human? It's he/it is a machine, but it is not a machine. I feel like the definition of a machine would be if it had a certain amount of knowledge and is confronted with something that didn't fit its knowledge, it would not question that. It'd be like, okay, well, this is not a thing. Whereas Testament is trying to reconcile things in the way that humans do, and the way that humans that he has been around has been seeing it all the time. They're reconciling, okay, what is this new thing? What is the blah, blah. So is he, like, does he have, is that what his soul is? Like that questioning, right? That he sees them doing that, therein lies the question. So, but now Testament will not have anybody to be able to have those type of discovery with. So, I mean, that's kind of fucked up, right?
Yeah, it's fucked up. It is. We can say that. Yeah.
Is that hell? Like,
that's the question. That's the question that is at the thing is if you make something to love you,
right,
and it's going to live forever, but you will not, have you condemned it to some kind of hell? Yeah. And if the question is at the end is Testament in some sort of hell?
Right. Because he can't do what Judith did. He doesn't have the programming in him to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that's
it is. I mean, I wrote it and I still don't like it. I would have loved to have told a story where even after Judith died, Testament picks up the humans research and continues it
Right.
or something like that. But instead, Testament's face disappears
Right.
and then just sits down on a rock
Yeah.
forever.
Because
Um,
again, the whole point is that nobody is going to go there unless they actually go there, and nobody wants to go there. So it's
yeah,
not like,
nobody
oh, he'll be
cares
there
enough to
until.
go pick up the robot
Yeah.
because, and I think that's part of it is I don't imagine that the sisters created Testament. Testament was made by some kind of corporation who doesn't care
Mm-hmm.
about Testament. I don't see the sisters making something like that, but they still have their
Right.
own cruelty
Yeah.
where I think there is a kind of moral, what's the word I'm thinking, atrophy that the sisters go
Like a blind
through.
spot, or.
Maybe, yeah, maybe it's a blind spot, but they see their own lives dwindling
Mhm.
probably very rapidly over the past couple years before the story really kicks off as they all start dying off of old age.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then nobody is thinking, what are we going to do with Testament? Or
Mhm.
if they are, they died before they
Mhm.
really talked to someone else about it.
Right.
And that if Judith had lived, maybe she would have figured out some kind of a solution there. But
But
it,
even like that would be something you plan, not you. So much planning went into this,
yeah.
like the trip and did all of these things. Nobody thought about like,
And that's,
hey,
yeah, is that we're going to
this
be
is a.
abandoning this robot, which I intentionally think of Testament as non-binary. They're like a sort of shapeshifter,
Mhm.
but also I don't even think of them as inherently adult. They're like halfway
Mhm.
between child and adult.
Yeah.
They're awake for the entire trip. So in a way, they're
Right.
older than everybody.
Right.
But also they have a sort of childlike faith and deference to the humans
Mhm.
that I think Testament has no initiative of their own,
Mhm.
which is ultimately, their tragedy. Because like after all
Right.
the humans are done, all they want to do is take care of them. They have no interest in continuing the science, really.
Right.
Um, why didn't anybody think about this? I think that's because the people who made Testament don't care. They're greedy
Mhm.
corporations of some kind. And that I also think Testament is maybe more evolved than other androids of its kind,
Mhm. Mhm.
where like probably the same model android somewhere else is going to get its memories wiped and redone somewhere or
Mm.
recycled or something. And the
Yeah,
idea
okay.
that like we program this thing with questions about God,
Yeah.
right? So like maybe the other robot wouldn't care that it's been left
Right.
alone because we didn't
Right.
make it to care for people.
Right. And it wasn't in a situation where it could sort of evolve untouched for decades and have that type of thinking reinforced. Yeah, the idea of if Testament has free will, I mean,
Does it?
kind of
I don't know.
not.
I don't know.
I mean, it
Probably
does, but
not.
it also
Maybe as
doesn't
much as the
because,
rest of us.
yeah, where Testament falls on the, obviously knowledge does not automatically equal maturity.
Hmm.
It knows all of this stuff. Is it like he slash it is not a pet,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a child, but also not. And it is. I was thinking I would assume the earlier parts of the book where they're all in hypersleep, and Testament is checking on them and everything. Obviously, gave me vibes from Prometheus, one of the
Mhm.
best parts of that movie.
Yeah.
Of
I think the best part
Fast,
of the movie.
yeah, yeah, Fassbender's watching parting his hair so that he looks
Yeah.
like So you think of that, you think of obviously Data, right?
Yeah.
But this character is in that continuum somewhere, but it is very much its own thing because of the situation that it's in, because of the structure that is around it, because you've built this story in a way that there is movement to it without having to have an antagonist or anything like that. There is weight to it without that having to be personified in something other than the two characters that we end up with and then end up with one character, which is kind of the problem.
Yeah.
The graves.
Hmm.
When did you hit on the idea of having the graves positioned the way that they are?
So I had originally just started drawing them. I knew I wanted this design of the graves to just be like raw stone with like a plaque carved in to it, but like not so of irregular sizes and stuff. I thought that sort of spoke to their interest in the natural world and a kind of architectural brutalism where like a
Mhm.
lot of their sort of monastery feels sort of comfy but brutalist and with an interest in like natural forms and stones and things. And there's this idea of returning to the earth and a
Mhm.
sort of very, very untouched marker out of the stones, which feels almost like Neolithic in a way. And I had in early versions started having it just in a grid, sort of the way that we do graves in um our own culture. But I came across the idea in a couple different ways. One, when you know exactly how many graves you're gonna need, that
Mhm.
gives you options.
Yeah.
Many religions do the way they treat the dead is interesting, and there are different kinds of burial that become artistic.
Mhm.
There's a particular basilica, I don't remember the name, it's like Saint Ursula or something like that. I don't remember. Where there's a whole chapel made out of the bones of nuns, similar to like the
Wow.
catacombs in
Mm.
Rome. I think it's
Mhm.
in Rome. And those are just like Catholic versions, right? But there's versions of that in a lot of different cultures of like venerating and like revering the dead through art in some
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
And there is a momentum to this story that is the inevitable death of the last person, right? In
Mhm.
the earliest versions of this, Judith's name was just the last sister.
Mm.
Before I came up with a name for her, there's a
Mhm.
finality. So to have the graves arranged in a spiral, I guess I should have
Mhm.
said that up front for the podcast. They know exactly how many they're going to need, and there's an end to that spiral.
Mhm. Mhm.
But also spirals are either ending or feel like infinite, right? You can imagine them keep going forever, and the end and beginning are subjective, right?
Mhm.
So I liked that idea. And you pan out and it looks sort of like Stonehenge. It has a timelessness to it that still speaks to this impulse that humans have had to have standing stones forever. Um, but I also didn't want to show. I wanted time in the graves in the early part where we have the initial burial, where we have testament leading this service, which I don't know what it's like for the average reader, but that was something that I wanted to be a little uncomfortable. I don't necessarily like the idea of testament, like leading liturgical duties, but also everybody's dead. And the two remaining sisters are exhausted by grief and age and sickness and kind of numb. So it's very natural for testament to just sort of take over
Mhm.
through the momentum of care for them. But we don't really see the shape of the graves until the
Mhm.
very end. And I
Mhm.
wanted that thing where you've seeded it earlier and now you get the reveal as a sort of punctuating experience
Yes.
that this really was inevitable the whole time. Maybe the way Judith died wasn't inevitable and is its own tragedy, but there was no
Mhm.
version of this where she wasn't going to die, whether it was how she died or it was another 3 decades
Mhm.
alone on this planet with this robot, where she only really starts to think of that as not alone in the very last moments of her life,
Mhm.
which, makes her ultimate decision to die a kind of betrayal of her new belief in Testament and their two-person community. And she has this new will to at least live for another year, but then has an opportunity to not and takes it and isn't even happy with that decision necessarily.
Yeah. Oh, that's depressing. It
This is
can
the only
be.
thing I've ever written that has made me cry.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. In retrospect, I can see why this would be a tearjerker at every stage. Yeah, it was interesting that the staging of it. We do see the cemetery early on, but it's from the ground level, and then the reveal at the end is obviously more bird's eye. I was thinking how that would reinforce in a, probably not a positive way, but certainly a negative way. It is spiraling, but it's the passage of time. At the beginning, it's like, okay, we've got it marked out and it's ticking off. It's being in a cell and counting
Mm.
the days on the side, doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the slash and all this. And how in the early days, it was probably just like a mechanical sort of, yes, this is happening. But like, at what point did it stop being a number and then start having weight to it?
Mm.
Is it that last spiral? Is it the last couple of things? And even just looking at the page again just now, it's almost like the way the spiral is constructed, it's almost like they are
Yeah.
all standing there as a testament to her as being
Yeah.
like she has an importance of being, the
She's under
last
a
sister.
tremendous amount of pressure, right?
Right.
That's part of it. Is yeah, I had them all facing the last one. They're all
Hmm.
facing the end. And
Yeah.
I even like I didn't include any of these stories of like what their lives were like before really the end.
Hmm.
But I like to imagine that they all had fairly happy, exciting,
Hmm.
fulfilled lives. I don't like to imagine that these are stupid people who've made a bad
No.
decision to come here. I wanted to imagine a life for them that I myself would be tempted to take.
Hmm.
But also, these are people that are probably more mystical than I am. Maybe not all of them. I think there's a broad range of beliefs, even within the order, and different ways of believing and acting. But they live with death. They know they will die.
Hmm.
And it becomes a kind of meditative labyrinth. If you're familiar with those, a sort of walking labyrinth used in meditation in some like Buddhist sects,
Okay.
where the path of their death is collectively, them together collectively making something.
Mm.
And I like to imagine a story of a bunch of these sisters coming up with this clever idea of arranging the graves in a spiral and being excited and happy about that. And what a clever idea that is. We're all so smart, and won't that be
Uh-huh.
nice?
Yeah.
But also, when does it start to feel
What's the
real? Like,
tipping
when
point?
does it stop to be a fun art project and
Right.
become what you planned on it being, this meditation on death
Right.
and community?
Right. The one random thought I had was, did they get to pick what stone they wanted, or is it just like the next person up goes into here and goes
I
into
like to
here?
imagine that they were picking their own, or they just left it up to Testament to walk into the desert and pick up a rock and carry it back. But
Right.
like, I think some of them probably were like, especially for those who didn't die by like mishap and stuff
Accident.
early on,
Hmm.
probably they were thinking about it and would even
Hmm.
have one that they were somehow involved in
Hmm.
choosing and
Oh,
marking in some way.
that's a good point. I wasn't thinking about that. What I was thinking was the order. Obviously, these women, form their own relationships, and it was like, when I go, I want to be buried next to my partner or whatever. So, would you have had a filled grave, a filled grave, a filled grave, an
Hmm.
empty grave, a filled grave, a filled grave, an empty grave? Like
I
they
think,
as the
yeah, I think it was
yeah,
sequential, right? To bring it back to
okay,
comics, whoever died next was next in line,
right,
right? And they did have their own relationship, certainly. I think many of them were celibate, many were not.
hmm,
And certainly
yeah,
outside of
okay,
sex, like they had special relationships with each other
hmm,
of a variety of kinds. But I think they thought of the whole thing as a family because Judith is the last one. And in the
right,
early part where we had the sort of montage of seeing their habitat built, you can see some of those stones start getting put up in the early years where like there's a
hmm,
few who like die of unexpected illness or something that Testament couldn't help with.
right,
But yeah, I
right,
think that you would be able to walk out your door and see that spiral growing. And you can even see it in Philomena. She
hmm,
knows that she is the next to die and that she is meditating on that inevitability and talks to Judith about it, who Judith knows it too, but doesn't want to
yeah,
acknowledge it.
yeah. I mean, that's what we all live with. We
Yeah.
all know we're gonna die, and
Yeah, we're
so
all gonna
it's
die. The question is who dies first and who dies last,
right.
right?
And really, that is, I mean, obviously everybody's important, but there would be a certain weight to who was the first,
Mm.
and then there's a weight to who was the last. And Yeah. In Solace County, you have this anthology that you get to do whatever you want with.
Mhm.
Do you find yourself thinking you might revisit some part of this setting? If not the story, do you give yourself permission to do
I
that?
do
Or,
with hesitance. Part of it
okay.
is I feel like Testament is just right where it is. Part of that I think is actually because it was initially shorter.
Mm,
I had to make it work in the most bare bones version of it and then stretch it a little bit, which
mm,
meant I got to what was really important and then
mm,
make it feel good
mm.
instead of all of this stuff and then cut away things.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So there's not
yeah,
like deleted scenes
well, there's
necessarily
I
that
like to
you're
think about them, right? And there's
right.
versions of this story. Like if this was a TV show, we'd have a lot more stories to tell. I do give myself permission to revisit some of those stories at some later date if I feel like it.
Hmm.
But at least right now, 4 months now since it came out, I don't feel like anything needs more.
Hmm.
And I would be hesitant to put too much icing on the cake,
Hmm.
right? Even though they are
Hmm.
separate, I would not do an extended version of this with like new stories, I don't think.
Hmm.
But having said that, I did all this world building and there's all
Yeah,
these
yeah,
characters I never got to do
yeah.
anything with that I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, like aliens and stuff.
Yeah,
There's like seed things, and I don't even know how to
yeah.
describe some of this stuff. But yeah,
Coming up with all those alien animals was so much fun, and
yeah.
I want to do more with that stuff.
It'd be interesting to, in 10 years, look back and
Yeah,
see
it could
like
be.
whether
Yeah.
if you returned to that again and what
Mhm.
that would look like, or it may not be anything that ties in any sort of particular way. It may just be something that in your head, you're like, oh,
Is
this,
connected. Yeah.
this wordless, whatever story about this alien, weird
I
creature,
could see
it just
myself
happens
doing
to be
that.
on the other end of
Yeah,
the,
I
of,
could
of
I
that.
could absolutely see myself doing that. Even if it's like I'm doing a story that because I'm the same person with the same interests is
Mhm.
90% of the same thing, I might tip it the rest of the 10% and be like, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same setting.
So what's next?
Oof. That's the classic question, and I should have prepared to talk about it.
I mean, that can be your answer if you're
Well, no, I think Solace County #4 is next.
okay.
That's what I'm currently working on. With every Solace County, I want there to be like diary slash poetry, short form comics, short
Hmm.
stories. And I'm kicking around some of those and like sketchbook drawings and stuff. So hopefully I will find some time to start actually making comics again soon. I mean, the semester is nearly over now, and that'll be nice. I have a graphic novel that I would very much like to do, which I've had the idea for, well, for at least 10 years now.
Hmm.
And there's a version of it in Solace County 1. There's a story where these guys are meeting after the death
Hmm.
of one of their friends that I would very much like to do a full graphic novel of. It was that story in Solace County 1 was adapted from one of the chapters of a script I was working on for it. I was talking at the beginning of this about how I'm interested in stories with uncomfortable social or moral premises about like what would you do in
Hmm.
a situation like that. And this is a story that's about like what would you do. Let me go back. The sort of log line for it, I guess, is a long absent young man returns to his hometown following the apparent suicide of his childhood best friend turned abuser.
Hmm.
So like how do you grieve someone who betrayed and hurt you? And it's a sort of not who done it so much as a why done it,
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
like trying to understand someone years later and see the life that they led that led them to a certain end. And I'd like to set it in like sort of eastern West Virginia, near like the West Virginia Maryland border.
Hmm.
And it's about masculinity and grief and self-destructive impulses. There's versions of it that I see becoming a kind of like crime story, almost like Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad-esque,
Hmm.
but with different kinds of stakes. But I would like to do that. I don't really have a script. It's not ready to pitch to anybody. And I have a few other stories that I'm interested in working on. Here's a little practical bit of advice for anybody listening who writes stories. In my sketchbook, I put a piece of tape on the side and write ideas on it.
Mhm.
And then I just write down all my ideas. So I create a tab for a specific page and I write all my ideas down on that page.
Mm.
Because if I don't write it down, I'll forget the idea. And
Mhm.
if I don't write it down in the same place, I lose it and I don't know where I wrote it down. So having a
Mhm.
dedicated place where I write the ideas down helps me a lot.
Mhm.
And I don't even question if it's a good idea or not until it's time to copy by hand all the ideas into the new
Mhm.
sketchbook. And
Mhm.
then that becomes the quality filter where I'm like, is that actually a good idea? Or did I just feel like it at the time? Or maybe that's a good idea for somebody else, but not for me.
Right.
And sometimes those things will sit there for years until another idea hits the page and I see a connection between those things and those turn into something like Testament. The idea of like a does the robot who loves you that you leave alone after you die, is that hell? Was like an idea on there for a couple of years before I
Mhm.
actually did anything with it. So I'll probably be digging around in there. Like I've got it in front of me here, and we've got ideas like let's see, lawnmower American dad gets into anarchist anti-materialist wisdom, or vampires of South Florida, uh,
Oh, that's interesting.
or prison hospice. So
Wow.
you, yeah. So I mean,
Okay.
anybody who
Yeah.
wants to steal those listening to this can, but you know, I'll figure
Yeah.
something out for the next thing. I would like, you know, a book deal with an advance and everything. But the nice thing about self-publishing is
Yeah.
no matter what, I'll keep doing stuff.
Yeah. How does Patreon fit into that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had a Patreon for years
Mhm.
and it's been nice. I don't make a lot of money off of it, but about 500 bucks a month now, and that's certainly not nothing. I like to think of Patreon as something that offsets the expenses of doing this work more than it is money like profit,
Mhm.
because it easily costs a lot of money to self-publish, to travel for shows and things.
Mhm.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it cost me upwards to 30 grand last year just to keep doing this work in terms of like printing books and materials and travel and all that stuff.
Mhm.
So Patreon helps with some of those costs. Uh, and I post 1, 2, 3 times a week. And right now I'm posting pages from the Vanishing Man,
Mhm.
and I host a book club.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I host a
Yeah.
book club where initially I had planned on the theme for it being all the nonfiction about writing and art that I buy and then never read. So now I have a
Mhm.
book club which will make me read it. But recently I've just sort of expanded it to be stuff that's on my to read shelf that
Mhm.
I will read with people who want to sign up, and we'll do it on Zoom. And that's
Mhm.
been a lot of fun. And yeah, every week I give away an original drawing to somebody in the mail, which has been fun. I've been doing that for years, and I've done over 900 drawings in that series now. I don't give
Mhm.
them all away. If it's a bad drawing, I still count it in the series, but I don't
Right.
give it to somebody.
Right.
And when I was beginning, I didn't do it every week. Once a month, everybody got one, which became untenable.
Untenable.
So I was like,
Yeah,
that's your
clearly that's where
that
that
you're
was going.
that's the founder's benefit because you are here early. Now it's once a week, somebody gets something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to scale that back. Looking at your I guess your social media stuff, the Patreon stuff, and the was it an Instagram post or whatever?
Mm.
There is a refreshing honesty about the cost slash the real work that goes into
Mm.
this. It's not just, hey, I'm working on this thing, blah, blah, blah. And I think you were talking about MoCCA, where you broke down in not like, receipts or whatever, but in
Oh.
probably a little more detail than I was expecting about how good of a show it was or wasn't, and where it
Mhm.
stacked up with the year before, and like an actual dollar amount in there. Do you find that type of honesty to be helpful to you? Would it be more work for you to not be that honest?
I
Well,
I
even
think
that
it's important to talk
impulse.
about numbers. right?
Okay.
I think it's important to talk about numbers, but I think that culturally people are not equipped to do so. It's like
Hmm.
rude or whatever, but more than
Hmm.
that, even people who don't think it's rude don't have the training and how to think about
Hmm.
money and numbers and labor very
Okay.
well. I was talking about this with some of my students recently, where I was talking about how much do you think you should be paid for this job if you were doing this professionally in like an
Hmm.
illustration thing. If anybody listening to this has taken any of my classes, they will recognize this in some form where we describe a job and its usage, like usage rates, like the usage and everything, and then they write down an amount that they think they should get paid for it. And
Hmm.
people will write down anything from like $112 to like $7,000 for the same job because no
Yeah.
one's talked to them about it. And that's,
Right.
I think, an important part of equipping people to be serious workers.
Hmm.
And I'll do that. I have my own methodology of coming up with this stuff, which briefly I will say is based off of how much it costs for the median rent for a one bedroom apartment in the US
Hmm.
is the sort of thing I use to work out my whole rate. But that's
Hmm.
gonna get us too far off topic. But even on Blue Sky the other day, I was talking about how like I was looking at the end of year finances from last year, and I made $6 an hour, a little bit over $6
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah. Okay. I remember that. Yeah.
And honestly, part of that is because I had a fairly expensive year in terms of like production,
Hmm.
and I did a lot of travel, and Testament came out in December, so I didn't see any money for that yet.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
but I was
Hmm.
doing a lot of work for it, right? If
Right. Right.
right, Testament took me 1,018 hours because again, I neurotically keep track of how long I spend on things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's from like signing the contract to official approval on the final edits.
Yeah.
So that's writing, rewriting, edits, drawings, meetings, all of that is
Hmm.
counted. And that's, if 2,000 hours a year is roughly full time, that's not getting paid for half of a year of work,
Hmm.
which I don't think I could do if it weren't for the fact that I was living in a very cheap apartment in North St. Louis for years and saving money that way.
Hmm.
And then I now live in Baltimore and my rent is higher, but it's still not that high compared to other people.
Hmm.
I was able to use that savings to live off of more or less. Probably Testament would take an even less time than that if I was able to just do that instead of juggling other jobs.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's important to talk to people about money
Hmm.
because if they're interested in doing the work, they need to go into that with eyes open, right?
Hmm. Right.
And I think it only benefits people who have all the money in the world if we don't all start talking about it.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
also, there's a version of that can get very doom and gloom, right? Where I'm like, I made slightly over $6 an hour last year, and that includes my teaching work. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's rough out here.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, at least in that Blue Sky post, it was important to me that I was like, I'm not just doing this to like poverty brag.
Right.
Like, I'm talking about this because people need to know how much it costs to do things.
Hmm.
And we all need to know how much we should get paid and how much we are getting paid.
Right.
But it's important that even though I tend to be kind of morose and that I will be very honest with people, I want to be honest. I love doing this.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
love it. I love it. It makes
Right.
me very happy. Even when it makes me miserable, it gives me joy,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Happiness is not the mark of a good life always, but I am
Hmm.
very happy making comics.
Right.
But it's also important that I cannot keep doing it at $6 an hour. That's why
Right.
this year, right now, I'm teaching a lot more so that I can like get some more money in the bank so that next time I can do another book.
Yeah. The knowing is good. Even if the numbers are scary, at least it helps you plan and make decisions. Do I like what I'm doing enough to take that hit? Versus like, I'm going to make this thing and it's going to make me a ton of money and it
Well,
doesn't.
hopefully, now that Testament's out, it's going to make me all
Right.
the money in the world and I'm going to
Well,
become an
yeah, yeah.
insufferable
But I mean,
bastard.
like your students and stuff,
Yeah.
everybody has to do that calculus and be like, okay, well, am I going to get out of this project whatever I
Mhm.
need at $6 an hour? And that getting out can be obviously not money, but it can be this is going to be emotionally fulfilling to me. This is going to be creative fulfilling to me. I will take that hit and I can plan for these other things knowing that this emotional fulfillment is going to earn me $6 an hour. I will do all these other things to be able to do it. And that could be a benefit just to help prepare the person who's having to do the work to just make smarter choices, and choices that can help sustain them while they're doing the work.
Well, and
Even if
I
it's
think
scary,
actually
but
a
yeah.
lot of people do make more money at this than I don't really
Right.
pursue freelance work very much, and I probably
Right.
should. And like mostly
Yeah.
that's $6 an hour largely as just self-publishing as my primary job. And
Hmm.
I'm not even taking freelance illustration. I was only teaching 2 classes last year
Hmm.
total. So like
Right.
I don't want to paint this picture that like this is
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that
Yeah.
absolutely impossible.
No, but the
Um
muscle, the idea of doing that, of that self-assessment and knowing, like,
yeah, I
okay,
think you got to get organized
that,
in your
yeah, yeah, yeah.
thinking, and that's
Yeah.
very important. You have to
Is
treat
that's
yourself like a serious employee and a serious worker, and you need to know how much.
right. Art is
Yeah.
work. It's amazing how that does not translate to not just the general populace, but also like the people that do the work. It just doesn't sink in. Does this type of self-reflection or tracking things and this type of non-artistic thinking come easily to you? Does that come naturally, or is that something you really saw that you
Um,
needed and you pushed yourself in that direction as a self-defense
it
mechanism?
comes very naturally now.
Okay.
I've been doing it for so long that it's hard to remember what it was like before I was doing it. But I
Hmm.
started doing it after graduating college, where I studied painting, drawing, and printmaking. I wasn't doing comics yet, but it was important to me that while I was working in coffee shops and various odd jobs and things, that I was still putting time into art, and I didn't want to lose that. I
Hmm.
didn't want to be one of the many arts graduates who never makes art after they graduate. I've always been good at self-initiating things. I
Hmm.
think you have to be in comics.
Yeah.
But for years, I was working in restaurants, various other jobs, but a lot of coffee shops. And I regularly ended up becoming managers at a lot of these things because I started to really look at processes and how things are done well. And then that ended up leading into leadership positions. And I've spent years kicking myself thinking like I'm wasting my time, slinging coffee all day instead of making art that matters. And I've come around to it now because I actually liked the work. I shouldn't have been, feeling bad about it. There's nothing
Hmm.
wrong with that. There's a lot of people doing stupid things in the world, and making a good cup of coffee for somebody is decent work out there for the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
But I learned a lot about ways of thinking organizationally and about
Hmm.
processes and scheduling and things by scheduling other people and training other people and things. And so my process has evolved over the years and gotten more and more complicated. But these days, my sketchbook is maybe a third of it is just to-do lists and pages full of tracking how many hours I'm spending on projects and
Hmm.
journal entries and things like that.
So your sketchbook is basically like your everyday capture type
Yeah.
of
Yeah. I'm
type of thing.
I think of it as much as I can put everything into the sketchbook. So it's like a scrapbook, a journal, a planner, an actual sketchbook for drawing in, which was funny. Once I lost a sketchbook and I spent forever looking for it because I'm writing important things down in there. I'm keeping
Yeah.
track of how many hours I have. At the time, I was even keeping track of like my expenses and stuff in the sketchbook. I don't do that now
Mm-hmm.
anymore for this reason because I lost the sketchbook and I'm like, where are my receipts? What's going on anymore? After I gave up on finding it again and started a new sketchbook, I found
Yeah.
it in my freezer. I think I had it in my hand and I got something
Yeah.
out of it without thinking. I put the sketchbook back in.
Yeah.
So it worked out in the end. But yeah, I take a very holistic approach to my sketchbook, and I find that makes it easier to do everything in there, right? The
Hmm.
to-do lists get easier because my journal is there. The journal is
Hmm.
easier because the sketchbook is there. I will
Hmm.
put down pictures of other people's art I find inspiring or just like a cool thing I saw in the newspaper because the sketchbook is there.
Hmm.
And then you can see the shelf behind me. This won't matter for the podcast, but I've got a shelf of sketchbooks over
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm up to 117 now.
Wow.
And that'll be a
Um,
problem for somebody else when I die.
oh, just out of curiosity, do you remember how long you were looking for the sketchbook before you found it in the freezer?
I feel like a week.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
not
okay.
that long. Yeah.
Okay. You had mentioned that in a post, and then hearing this reminded me of a similar situation. So I have ADHD, so I take
Hmm.
Vyvanse, my medication. I lost a bottle, so 90 days worth of Vyvanse. I picked it up on a Friday, and by Sunday, I could not find it. Could not find it, could not find it, could not find it. I had to jump through all these hoops to get it because it's a controlled substance, and
Yeah.
so blah, 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 blah. A year later, almost to the day, I am in my bedroom. I'm moving some stuff around. I have a stack of clothes that have been under a thing and under a thing. I'm like moving them. I'm moving this like pair of Levi's and it jiggles. I'm hearing like a little rattle in it. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I reach in the pocket of the pants I know I haven't worn. I wasn't wearing those pants and put them in. I think what happened was those pants were there and folded up, and I was cleaning, moving stuff around the room, and I had the drugs in their big orange bottle,
Hmm.
and I didn't want to put them somewhere, so I like put them in the pocket of the thing so it wouldn't like roll out, roll under the bed or
You
whatever.
think you're putting it there so you won't lose
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
look at how clever I am. I will
Yeah.
not lose these things. Those fucking things. I literally like I'm tearing the house apart. I'm like, where did they go? Did we throw them away? I'm literally like going through trash and everything, and then finally give up on it a year later.
Mhm.
Just like, oh yeah, here they are.
Mhm.
So when you're like, oh, I left my sketchbook in the freezer, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's funny, but hold my beer. I had one more thing I wanted to ask about the notebooks. I also have a process where I have that type of everyday capture and everything goes in there. How big are your notebooks, like in terms of page count?
They vary, right? Like some of them are literally just pieces of paper stapled together, maybe like 40
Right.
pages, but some are much larger. In general, though, they're roughly a pretty standard, like moleskin size, like 5 by 8 inches, probably around 200 pages,
Okay.
maybe a little
Uh,
more, maybe a little less.
okay. I asked because I'd gone back and forth between having like little 48-page field notes
Yeah.
type of things, but then also like the larger Leuchtturm moleskin, sort of like 200-page
Yeah.
larger thing, and going the back and the forth. And I was like, okay, I'll have the smaller as like the everyday capture, and then I'll transfer things to the
Hmm.
larger, and then use, like you had mentioned earlier, using that transfer process to be like, is this worth me rewriting?
Yeah.
And for part of it, it was, and part of it wasn't. And then there was just the thing of these little 48-page ones. I go through like one of these things a week, not
Hmm.
necessarily because I fill them up, although I fill up a good portion of them, just so I can have them as like a separate thing. So if I lose it, well, I only lose like a week's worth of,
Yeah.
whatever. But figuring that out, trying to sort of shake it out and trying to not be precious about it, to be
Hmm.
un was that the term? Unprecious? Is that what you
Unprecious. Yeah. Which
unprecious?
is not a real word. I made it. I mean,
Well,
you put un in front of anything
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, close enough. But being unprecious with something, that doesn't mean that you don't care about it,
Yeah.
but not letting
Mhm.
the preciousness of it to be like, oh, I'm going to draw this in here, or I'm gonna. Well, okay, for you, literally, like sketchbook, that's a different thing. But for me, like drawing out grids and all of these things, I was like, no, I don't necessarily need it to look great. I just need it to be functional. I need the function of this thing,
Mm.
and how do I capture this thing in a frictionless manner? And that has evolved into just carrying around the little field notes thing, and usually wearing a shirt that has a pocket in the front so
Yeah.
that like it's almost always there.
When you don't have
Um,
that pocket and you're really
like
looking
I,
for it again.
yeah, I've even started
Yeah.
leaning towards t-shirts that have pockets in the front just so that I can have that. Because having it in my pants pocket, because I have pens, clipped to it, and like that gets a little awkward and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I just need my thing. So for my work uniform, quote unquote, is I tend to wear a button-down shirt just so I can
Mhm.
have that as I'm walking around. Anyway, that was a dive. But in terms of functionality, being an artist and being a
Yeah.
creator and being unprecious about things and trying to reduce the friction of things, but also tracking information so that you can make informed decisions about things, about your art, and about the ways that you can set yourself up in the best way to be able to do the soul crushing, gut wrenching, beautiful book like Testament. And I shouldn't say soul crushing. It
I mean,
it
you
was
can say whatever you want.
no, but it was a wonderful experience to sit down and read it. I read it in one sitting. It had me thinking, and then I didn't think about it for a while, and then I came back to thinking about it, so it stuck with me. It is certainly time well spent putting this thing together because it is a gorgeous book. Remind me where people can find you. You have a Patreon, you have Instagram. People want to follow you. How do they do that?
Obviously, I got a website, jmarshallsmith.com. They can also find me on Instagram and Blue Sky, J Marshall Smith. There's no punctuation in there, just J
Yeah.
Marshall Smith. If they wanted to check out the Patreon, it's patreon.com/J Marshall Smith. Everything's just under J Marshall Smith, which
Branding.
hopefully makes it easier to find me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking a sizable chunk of your evening
Hey, I
to
had a
talk
blast.
about.
It's fun to just talk about my work with somebody with intelligent questions about it. I think your
But
your takeaway, everything you said, felt very valid. I was absolutely thinking of like Jesuits with this
mhm,
book, and I try, especially with this story, I try to be a restrained writer,
mhm, mhm,
to give just enough that the reader can ask questions of themselves, like just
mhm,
enough that they have something to chew on and
mhm,
not
mhm,
hit them over the head with a bunch of answers. Because I'm more interested in getting people to think about things than
mhm,
to tell them what to think. I've had people write to me about this. I mean, it's only been out a couple months, but I have people write to me about this, about how it completely affirmed their decision to leave Christianity. And other people write in behind and be like, it affirmed my faith.
mhm,
Because people bring their own stuff to it. And I
mhm.
feel like if it decidedly was one thing or the other, it would not have been a truly honest work.
Right.
Because I think of it as a portrait of faith, not a case for or against it.
Mhm, mhm,
And that is it is magnified because it is in the frontiers of religion as well as
mhm,
space. It's sort of the edge of
mhm,
what do we think about the theology of artificial beings
mhm,
and how they fit into a religion that never could have imagined them.
mhm,
I like to think that this is a book for people with firsthand experience with Christianity who have a sort of, let's say, uncomfortable relationship with it now. And there's a lot of people like that. So it's important for me that I'm fairly restrained in
mhm,
writing this stuff, which also makes this interview fun for me because I get to just let loose and talk about
mhm.
whatever because
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be in the book. It's not canon, it's
Right.
not in the book.
No, no, no. No, the book is incredibly restrained. Part of that restraint gives it the breadth that those extra pages allowed you to have. Boiling it down to 78 pages and then another 30 or 40 pages to add scope and silence and all of that
Hmm.
stuff to it. And the fact that you can have two people read the same book and give you completely opposite reads on it is, I think, no pun intended, a testament to the craft and to the work. It was interesting to me that what it triggered in me is I did not grow up in a particularly religious household, but I was sort of nominally Catholic, but both of my parents went to Jesuit institutions. So, like, my dad
Hmm.
graduated from Notre Dame, and my mother went to Santa Clara. So, that Jesuit social justice emphasis on education and work and all of that sort of thing, that has really been ingrained in me more than like actual dogma, whatever. So to see like, oh, nuns in space going to do science on
Hmm.
some planet, I was like, man, well, not sign me up, but I was like, yes, that very fertile ground for that stuff to get into my head and then start thinking about,
Well, a lot of
all
people
these
think
other
that
things.
this premise that the religious scientist part is
Yeah,
the more fantastical part of this because they're used to a kind of anti-science
yeah,
evangelical stance on Christianity
no,
because
no,
they don't
no,
understand, they don't have the education to understand that like historically most scientists were religious
right,
just because of how society functions, but also like there are
yeah,
whole sects even within Christianity, not to mention other religions, that prioritize
yes,
the study of the world and themselves and others
right,
as a religious act, not as
right.
separate from it.
Right, that's the
Yeah.
worship. That is the sacrificing of all of these worldly things in order to worship this gift that has been given to you by your creator, or by the
Yeah.
supreme, whatever. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's
I
really,
like hearing
really good
that.
stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. The next time you have something you want to talk about, please feel free to drop me a line if I don't hear about it already, if I'm not bugging you to come back on the show.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So there you have it, folks. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you are given the opportunity to do so, because it really helps us out and we would super appreciate it. So, until we meet again, hopefully soon, my name is Greg. Stay safe, keep reading those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.